So welcome to Simply Verified Beef, the podcast. We have the topic today of practical mineral management. So we've got a couple of guests joining us today. So I will throw it over and we'll get right into things. And Jason, do you want to introduce yourself and your role?
Hi, Amy. I'm Jason Brock. I work as a beef specialist for Sollio Agriculture, formerly a co-op fédéré here in Quebec. That also has some interest in the Maritimes and Eastern Ontario as well. So I deal mostly with cow-calf producers and feedlots. I've been in this position for about 10 years now, and I'm also a cow-calf producer for about 25 years.
Excellent. And thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us today, Jason. And we'll throw it over. We've got Melissa Downing.
Hi, Amy, and thanks for having me on again to your podcast. I am the Verified Beef Coordinator for Alberta and been in that role for 6.5 years almost, and also a cow-calf producer in East Central Alberta. Been involved in some other parts of the industry as well with value chains and feedlot production and some research background.
Excellent. Well, we're going to talk about mineral today, mineral supplementation in particular. So just starting from kind of the big picture scope, Jason, why do we need to supplement our cattle? And can they just survive on their own with the green grass that we're giving them?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and one that we get often out in the field. And producers, definitely they focus on the forage side, which is a good place to start for the diet of the cattle. One of the things in beef that's very hard to establish is when it comes to lack in minerals and vitamins is the direct impact, because there's so little research done and there's so many variables when it comes to research that it's really hard to pinpoint certain lacks of certain minerals or vitamins and what their direct impact is. One of the things that we compare often is we make the analogy of, if your forage is sort of like the gas in your car, well, your mineral and vitamin supplementation is like your oil changes. So you might get away without doing it regularly, but eventually it will cause problems long term. And that's the approach that I take with my producers, especially here in Eastern Canada, where we have a lot of soils that are deficient in especially microminerals. One of the reasons why supplementation is that much more important. And I think in general, when I look at my producers, the ones that have a decent year-round mineral program, they don't have nearly as many problems as some of the other producers do that have a tendency to think it's because they have, some kind of spores or fungus in their, or toxins in their forages. But a lot of times it's just the basic mineral supplementation program that isn't there. And even a minimal program is better than no program at all, or just sort of that slug feeding when it comes to the production stage of the cattle when they're getting into calving and rebreeding. Minerals and vitamins, they complement each other quite a bit. So oftentimes it's not necessarily one thing that's lacking. If one thing is lacking, more than likely there's several minerals or there's several vitamins that are lacking. So that can cause multiple problems, not just one necessarily.
No, right on. And Melissa, do you have anything to add when you're talking about at the ranch level, why those supplementations might be necessary?
I agree with everything that Jason said. Obviously, he has a lot more experience in this, but I know even on our farm, when we bought the farm and we started with our herd, when we took a look at our mineral program a few years in, we had a noticeable increase in the health of our cattle in general, a decrease in things like calving issues that we had a lot of retained placentas the first year we were calving out these cows that we had bought, and a lot of other issues. And it's hard to really pinpoint one issue and what it's attributed to necessarily, but that was something we looked at, and it did seem to make a really big difference in our year-round system and the improvements we saw there.
Okay, excellent. So the theme of the podcast this season is practical. So when we're talking about practical management of minerals, what are some options or best management practices for feeding that stuff? Like there's always the argument about are blocks better, is loose better, TMR. Jason, any thoughts on some of those types of things?
For sure, without a doubt, in my opinion, TMR is the ideal way to do it, because that way you're sure that every animal is getting exactly what we want. But practically, there's not many cow-calf people that do feed with a TMR, and certainly not year-round. When you go back to the term practical, that's not necessarily the best approach. So most of what we see with our producers is some kind of free choice system, whether it be in powder or whether it be in block form. I think most mineral companies, suppliers nowadays, they have a pretty good lineup of products, whether it's in powder or whether it's in blocks. Most of them, they have both available for every type of mineral that they have. Ourselves, I'd say we sell probably about half and half blocks and powder. So it really depends on each producer and what works best for them. Here in the East, we have a lot of moisture and humidity issues. So we have a lot of people that have fed powder in the past that end up with a lot of loss because of that humidity and just the saliva of the cattle sometimes will make it cake together. So I think it's really a personal choice, blocks or powder. We don't see a difference in consumption here, one or the other, very even as far as that goes. And I think it's just whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay. And Melissa, any thoughts from kind of the on the ground ranch level?
I think there are different scenarios and times of year where one might be more practical too, right? So I don't really have too much to add. I know we find that in the summertime, we have mineral feeders that we like to use to move around the property. And sometimes we have those that are with the oilers that we use, and that helps to manage our grazing practices as well. So there might be different considerations there too.
In general, I think, Jason, what I'm hearing is as long as they're consuming it, then get it into them however is best for your place.
For sure. And like I said, absolutely ideal is a TMR, but that's just practically difficult. I've seen studies out of the States where they've gone with lick tubs, and in the same herd, the consumption was bang on what they predicted. It was a supplement tub, which was around 400 grams per head per day. And they redid the same test with the same group with the smart feeders that were reading individual consumption, and it varied from 70 grams to almost a kilo. So it's hard when it's free choice to really observe what the consumption is per animal, but it's still better than not feeding at all. And I'd say the thing I find the most often is people sometimes don't have enough service points for mineral. I think that's a big thing, where if you have one mineral feeder, depending on the size of your herd, that might be your issue more than what type of mineral or what form you're feeding it in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when margins are tight, we hear this all the time. One of the first things sometimes to go is trimming up the mineral bill. It was something that I know that some of the older, my dad was one who go to the co-op, and if he spent his budget on some feeds and some other things, and he just wouldn't pick up mineral that time and would catch it on the next round, depending on cash flow and depending on all sorts of things. So he mentioned we used some new blocks and the cows were going through it like candy. And he was like, I don't know if we can keep to afford doing this. And I was like, well, they're obviously doing it for a reason. So any thoughts, Jason or Melissa, on what's kind of the best bang for your buck if you're looking, or do we just say, get the money into the mineral and get it into the cows and good things will happen? Because I guess one cow that comes up open because she's deficient is probably got all your margin tied into it.
Amy hit on a good point there, that it's definitely one of the first places that people cut. And I've seen that since in the last 10 years, absolutely. And especially in the last year or two, most definitely, with margins shrinking and cost of everything going up. And people are looking to cut as much as they can anywhere. And I'm guilty of exactly what your father did, Amy. When we started up here, it was, and back then it was even just salt. It wasn't necessarily mineral. It was just salt blocks. And if we had time and thought of it, we bought one and threw it in with the cows, and that was it. But I think now it's important, as you mentioned, and as an example, one cow coming in open in the fall, and that pretty much takes up your mineral budget right there. As I mentioned earlier, I think if you can have a decent mineral program year round, that's the best scenario. And when you get into the pasture season, we can come up with different formulations that are much cheaper, with lower in vitamins, lower in phosphorus. So you can kind of split up that investment over the year. I tend to tell producers that you need to look at it as an investment, not as an expense. A good mineral program we're talking maybe $40 to $50 per head. So for sure, if you're got a 50 cow herd or 100 cow herd, it's $2,000 or $5,000. But when you look at the flip side, one or two cows open, you lose one or two calves at the prices we're seeing today. You pay for a lot of mineral with one lost calf, pay for a lot of mineral with one or two open cows. And sometimes it's not as drastic as that. At times, what I'll mention to producers is the importance of that first colostrum and the quality of colostrum. And I think that mineral supplementation goes a long way to increasing the quality of the colostrum. So those calves that get a bit of a head start, they might be weighing 15, 20, 30 pounds heavier in the fall. So at $2 and some pounds, it adds up pretty quick and you make back that investment quite quick.
Really good point on colostrum quality as well. I guess I wouldn't have made that math connection. Melissa, anything to add?
I guess Jason's right. I mean, it's about the investment and the results down the road. So you might not see it immediately, which makes it easy to give it up immediately to say, well, I don't need to do it right now because I can't afford it. But we've seen that on farm where you have lower health costs because we had less retained placentas, things like those. Even having a higher breed up in your first or second cycles will obviously pay back a lot more. But it's really hard to connect the dots on your own farm and guarantee what that is from, right? But you do see consistently those people who have really strong mineral programs, vaccination programs, doing all of those things right. They have the results to show that they're being profitable through those investments. So those are long-term strategies, but it's a prevention versus cure, and it does pay off. It's just making that a priority as a long-term investment.
Yeah, that's fair. I saw someone who had posted about the buffet version of mineral options. So instead of having sort of that all-in-one blend, taking like their selenium block, their salt block, the phosphorus, and so they've got things broken up as far down into different buckets that the cows can choose, and apparently they'll choose whichever one and consume whichever ones they are deficient in. Any thoughts there, Jason? Because I didn't know if it was like just presumption, if there was any science behind it, or if really that all-in-one, one lick, get your needs fed is better. Any thoughts on that kind of buffet style approach to mineral?
Yeah, I've seen similar posts and people touting that as a good way to feed out your mineral. I can't necessarily say that I've seen the science behind it to back it up. One thing that I do know for sure is that in some of our formulations, because there's certain minerals that are very off-putting to cattle, the flavor of them, that in some cases we have to add a flavoring agent along with the salt to get them to consume the amount that we recommend. So just that lends me to believe, well, if there's, I believe it's potassium and magnesium that are two of the most off-putting flavors or smells for cattle. So just based on that, if you were to put them out, likely their cattle aren't eating any of that at all. So that's why I would recommend going with a company that has some proven results and some technology and the blends, because at the end of the day, I don't really think you're going to save a lot of money. And the likelihood that they might be deficient in one of those minerals or vitamins might end up costing you that little bit that you're saving.
Yeah, that's fair. Melissa, do you have any comments there? I don't know if you've heard of that or seen that out there before.
Nope, but what Jason said makes sense. I would expect that some of them wouldn't taste very well and they would just avoid them.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if this is an issue. I've never heard of people feeding that way having a big issue, but there are certain minerals too that you have to worry about toxicity levels as well. I don't know that cattle would actually go and eat that much of the individual mineral that much, but I still think, just to be safe, you're better off just putting a blend out there.
Okay. No, that's good. I was just curious, just popped up into the the social media feed. And I thought, well, I've got Jason on the line here. I shall ask him. So record keeping is obviously a key part of the Verified Beef Production Plus program. And Melissa's an expert in terms of how to keep some of those records. So Melissa, do you just want to run down quickly about what those requirements are for feeding medicated feed or water? And if mineral supplementation has some medication in it, what sort of tracking we need to do?
Yeah, sure. So the whole goal of verified beef is to make sure we're keeping the beef that's going into the food chain free from any residues and as a safe product for people to consume. When it comes to feed and that including mineral, the biggest concern is if we have products that are medicated that have a withdrawal time of any kind. So there are some products that might be medicated or considered somewhat medicated, like a Monensin product that could often be included in a mineral mix, but because they have a 0 withdrawal time, they don't need to be recorded for our traceability or tracking purposes to verify that they meet withdrawals. So if there's no withdrawal time, we don't need to record that, or you can record it for your own purpose, but it's not necessary because there's no withdrawal time to report that to verified beef. If you're using any products with a withdrawal time, just make sure that you're writing that down or recording that in whatever way you keep track of your records, and then checking on that when you're shipping cattle.
And we can put the example records in the show notes so that you've got a link to that if somebody out there is interested in starting to record some of these things. Jason, do you have any best management practices or anything around record keeping as it pertains to that type of stuff? I know that you guys in Quebec have a little bit more lock and key over what gets put into some of these minerals and whatnot in terms of veterinary prescriptions. So any comments that you'd have for either in Quebec or outside of Quebec?
Yeah, well, I think Melissa made some really good points there. For sure, here it's been quite a while that we've needed vet scripts for most of our medicated feeds. So there is a record there, but it can still lead to errors, and especially when you get into withdrawal periods for slaughter, you definitely need to be careful. And I think in the past, most people that were doing any kind of record keeping had a binder or a folder in the barn or whatever to keep track. But nowadays, there's just so many tools available with your phones and with your apps that it's very easy, I think, for someone to do that. And we see that with our producers here that have gotten onto the VBP Plus program, that was maybe the one thing that they were missing, that they had some kind of a record, but it wasn't clear, and that's encouraged them to clean that up a bit and be able to do a better follow-up on that record keeping.
Excellent. Well, those are all really good points. I think there are a lot of tools out there. We will put a few in the show notes if you're going the pen and paper route, but basically there's lots of different options, and however you've got it recorded, as long as you've got the proper things and stuff on the records, then VBP is A-okay with it. So we're getting to the end of the time here, but I would really like to thank Jason and Melissa for joining me today on this topic that I think doesn't get enough airtime, if I'm going to be perfectly candid. I think we talk about a lot of things. Mineral sometimes is one that falls through the cracks. So I do appreciate the time to join me and chat a little bit about mineral supplementation. So thank you, Jason and Melissa.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to Season 2 of the Simply Verified Beef podcast. And if you could please recommend us to a friend or neighbor, that would be spectacular. And we'd like to give an extra shout out to our Season 2 sponsor, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, in collaboration with New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. And we'd just like to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next month.